Hello. Today we're going over the matchup graphs for week 5. We got quarterback, running back, receiver, and I'm actually going to throw in some tight end this week too. But starting off with the quarterbacks, the new number one guy in volume, that is Jaden Daniels. The rushing helps a ton. The matchup isn't the greatest, but maybe a little better for him compared to the average quarterback. It kind of fits the graph perfectly in terms of him actually being like that high floor, low ceiling guy compared to his normal, because the Browns are third in man coverage rate. They have really good corners. They run man a lot, but that also is good for rushing quarterbacks, especially scrambling quarterbacks. And Jaden Daniels scrambles more than any quarterback in the NFL right now. So the rushing should be there this week. The outside corners against Terry McLaurin and those other receivers, that doesn't help him, but should be a higher floor. Overall, a pretty solid start. Fields set up decently well. Dallas hasn't really been that same defense. They're fourth worst against rushing quarterbacks this season. We're seeing Justin Fields' volume increase a little bit. I think Cowboys will at least put up some points on the Steelers. It won't be that game that we saw in week 1 or week 2 where it's like 15-10. I think it should be a little better than that. Overall, decent matchup, solid start right in that green area. The third best volume overall now. Lamar Jackson, kind of that perfect start this week. He has dominated the Bengals in the past. They also play a decent amount of man coverage, so scrambling quarterbacks. He usually gets about 50 rushing yards against the Bengals each time he plays them. The last 5 times he's played them, he has had 20-plus points in 4 of them. Overall, very consistent against the Bengals. They haven't been able to stop him in terms of week to week, and the coverage just matches up well for him overall. In this same game, we got Lawrence versus Richardson or Joe Flacco. Both have not been very good. Jacksonville is last. They're allowing 9 points per game more than a quarterback's average so far. So Richardson started off rough. Say, I don't know what it's actually at, but like 14 points per game. We would expect him, just with the Jacksonville matchup, to score 23. They're also first in man coverage by a mile, which would be great for him specifically if he does start. But even if Flacco does start, it's fine for him too. Generally better for fantasy quarterbacks if you're facing man coverage. More big play opportunities, better in the passing game overall. Lawrence on the other side, he has good volume. Like, he's 7th in volume right now overall. He still runs more than people would think. And the Colts defense not only hasn't been good, but they're really banged up. Jacksonville getting a little healthier, maybe Evan Ingram back. Christian Kirk has been better. Brian Thomas coming on. So I'd like Trevor Lawrence as a general streamer this week against Indy. Love down here. The explosive pass plays is what I want to point out. They are first by a mile in explosive plays this year, Green Bay. And also that is with Malik Willis starting 2 games. So they have 37 in this offense. The next closest is 29. The Rams are 30th against explosive pass plays. Their secondary has been pretty bad, especially their corners. Reed, Dubs, Wicks, they match up extremely well. I love Jordan Love this week, just the ceiling. He has, it says lower floor, high ceiling in terms of the graph. A little better in terms of floor just because of the matchup. And the volume isn't terrible, like 21st, but still, it's not like he's not getting any volume. We saw what he did last week, but a very, very high ceiling in my opinion. If you play DFS, I kind of like him in DFS. Brock Purdy, kind of similar. The weapons are back. And Arizona, a lot of these division games this week, we look at the history, he's dominated the Cardinals. He's played them 3 times. He has 9 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Every single time, he's dominated them. The weapons are all back. Overall, same thing. Lower floor a little bit just because the volume isn't there, but very high ceiling. Darnold in this revenge game versus the Jets, sadly, not very good of a matchup. They are 8th against quarterbacks, and they're probably a lot better than that overall. And it's also a very wide receiver-centric offense. Like, you don't have Hawkinson back there yet, and that's the Jets' strength. Like, they have 2 insanely good corners. They're going to be 50-50 on Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and he doesn't run the ball. So it's tough. Lower ceiling for sure than is normal, and then obviously lower floor just because of the volume, and he doesn't run the ball. Pittsburgh has been below average against the pass. So we see Prescott right here. They're 13th against quarterbacks, but they're around 17th, 18th against the pass. So I don't hate Dak Prescott this week. I think they'll do fine. CD isn't going to be shadowed by Joey Porter Jr., so when you're looking at Dak, like, that's the only receiver he has. That's important. Moving on to running back. The ceiling, compared to a player's usual, like normal. In the red, I added that this week. It means they're not getting the goal line work. That's not factored into this volume rank, so I want to point that out, like DeAndre Swift. The matchup, it can't get any better. He's got Carolina. It's the perfect matchup. The volume isn't terrible. Projected for 18th, I will say it's inconsistent volume, so it is not trustworthy volume. But he has a shot at getting good volume and a great matchup. So overall, a fine play. Just not going to get the goal line work. It's going to be relying more on the efficiency and the receiving, but still should be very possible when he's going against the Panthers. Jacobs up here, kind of that best guy on this graph at least. They are 4th worst against the rush, the Rams. I talked about how bad they were against the pass. They are also not good against the run. It's overall just not good. The Packers have been putting up a lot of points when they have Jordan Love. They've had 2 games with them, and they put up a ton of points. Josh Jacobs hasn't scored yet. I would not be shocked at all if he scored this week. The Rams, overall, pretty bad in terms of the receiving running backs and rushing running backs. He has great volume overall. Top 7, I think number 5 right here is what his volume is, maybe number 6. But overall, it is going to come around with Jordan Love back in this lineup. This offense looks great. And Jacobs, as an NFL back, has looked good. Fantasy, it's going to come along. Stevenson up in this green, but I'm not confident. It kind of sucks just because he's had the fumbling problems. Antonio Gibson's behind him. He fumbles more than Stevenson does even. It's tough, though. I don't trust him this week just because there is a chance that he just loses a ton of volume. So it's one of those things where this volume is not guaranteed, even though he's projected for top 5 volume this week. And a solid matchup overall. It's just a very risky start. So unless you're kind of deciding between guys and you want to go with him, but I wouldn't say he's a must start this week at all, even though he is in this green. Henry, the yards before contact is always the story. The Ravens are always going to be first. Henry benefits him more than anybody because he can get ahead of steam running forward. The Bengals D-line, they are healthier. They're getting back some guys, but overall, they're still pretty bad. It is a huge ceiling just because of that yards before contact compared to the Bengals. It's basically first versus last this week. So it is one of those games where Henry, he matches up well because the receiving doesn't really matter. The rushing is going to be there for him. So especially if they have a good game script, he should be a really good play this week. Kenneth Walker, barely in this top 20 for volume in terms of projection, but same thing as I said in week 1. He's probably going to have better volume than what this says. We saw that in week 1, and we saw that even in week 4. I think the volume is going to be projected higher and higher throughout the week, and they're playing the Giants. It's a great game script overall, probably better than this 20th ranking. Overall, like him a lot. Lower floor, high ceiling. I think it's more high floor, high ceiling just because of the volume. Hall has been the talk of the town. Not in a good way. Rodgers, he is better suited for Flores in terms of the matchup. They're playing Minnesota. It's not the greatest matchup for Breece Hall. But we see Brian Flores dominate against quarterbacks so far, and they run a very complex defense. The best guy to go against the complex defense is a guy that's been playing in the NFL for 45 years. He knows what to do. He can call his own offense, basically. So that helps Breece Hall a lot in terms of his overall offense. Hopefully they come back around. And Rodgers, he's played Flores before many, many times. Breece Hall, I have faith. I think it's going to be okay. The Devontae Adams news will affect a lot in terms of that offense in general. But you're not sitting Breece Hall. Come on. Cabrera is really tough. Kansas City, they are first overall against running backs. They are first overall against receiving running backs, which is big for Kamara. They're also first overall against rushing running backs. They have just been dominant against RBs this year. So it is a tough start. You're obviously starting him. Like, I think he might be the RB1 overall right now. So it's a tough start, but still lower expectations maybe. Achane, the ceiling is still massive. I've seen a lot of questions about, like, people benching him. I have him in my main league, and I'm starting him. Like, I'll just say that. The ceiling is massive, like I said. The volume, right here, 14th. Like, that is way better than you would expect. I know the offense has been great, but I trust Mike McDaniel, and especially those big plays. Like, you really just need one. And a lot of the questions I got is like, oh, would you start Achane or Bucky Irving? Bucky might go off tonight, and I'll eat my words. But in general, like, I trust Achane to have a 20-point game a lot more than I do Bucky Irving against the Falcons defense. So the matchup isn't as bad as this suggests, I would say. 5th best is what the Patriots have been. But overall, Huntley adjusting. 2nd week in this offense, it's all about timing. They can get a lot of screen work, receiving work for Achane. Overall, I'm going to still play him. James Cook, 20th best volume. It's not that bad. There's just only 30 guys on the graph this week. Hopefully a better game. Overall, it's a tough matchup. Like, Houston's been pretty solid on defense. They have a good defensive line. But James Cook, I don't think it's going to be like last week where Buffalo just blew him out and he barely got any volume at all. And here is the receiver and tight end. Looks a little chaotic. There's 56 guys on here. So I added about 8, 9 tight ends. There's not many relevant ones, so it's tough. And also a couple on bye, so that just makes it even worse. But as always, red guys are the shadows. There isn't many. I'll go over those real quick. just because there's not much. Like, Hill might get shadowed by Gonzalez, but still think he's going to be fine that way anyways. Cooper, his shadow is St. Juste, which doesn't affect him at all. Metcalf, Deontay Banks, not really a big deal. The only one that really matters is Mike Evans, and he's going to be shadowed by AJ Terrell. That not only helps Godwin even more because they've just been really bad against the slot. Cross my fingers, that could age wrong. But Godwin set up really well in terms of the matchup. Mike Evans, not as much in terms of that shadow. Pittman is in this top right, kind of hiding right behind Godwin, if you see here. He is a tough start if Anthony Richardson starts. Like, he's always going to be a tough start. If Flacco starts, I think he's a must start, which is kind of crazy to say given the last 4 weeks that we've seen from him. He's been pretty horrible, but with Flacco, he averages 323 yards a game last year. That was first in the NFL. Insane. And we look at the last games against Jacksonville for him. Last 3 games, 41 targets, 30 catches, 430 yards, and a touchdown. 430 yards in the last 3 games. He's had 18 plus fantasy points in 4 straight against Jacksonville. And we look at Amari Cooper last year. When he had Joe Flacco in those 5 games, he averaged 22 points per game. So we think like Amari Cooper is basically the same as Michael Pittman, that same offense. He's going to be that number 1 guy. And then you put him against the worst outside receiving coverage in the NFL. Like, it's the perfect matchup for him. A must start if Flacco plays. Richardson, low floor, high ceiling. That's what it's going to be. Wicks and Dubs, I talked about Jordan Love. Reed is fine. Like, he's a slot guy. It's going to be a little bit worse matchup, but it's a small sample size still. I'm not, like, worried about Jaden Reed. But Wicks and Dubs over here, 31st, those Rams corners. Tre'Davious White has been bottom in the league in terms of fantasy points allowed per coverage snap. It hasn't been great. Dubs projected for a little less targets, but he's going to be on the field a little bit more, and he's probably going to have White on him a little bit more. So tiny better matchup, but overall, I like Wicks better. Both are startable, especially just with this matchup. A little bit riskier, but both have really high ceilings. Thomas Jr. up here, when you were comparing him to Christian Kirk has had amazing targets. He's 3rd in projected targets for this week, but a little tougher matchup against the Colts in terms of the slot. Again, those outside guys, they're the banged up guys. Inside, they're not horrible. They've been fine. And Brian Thomas Jr. has come on recently. Those outside corners are their weakness. His targets, 4 in week 1, 4 in week 2, 9 in week 3, 9 in week 4. I would expect closer to 9. And that's a really good matchup. Overall, pretty solid spot in this green area. Higher ceiling than his average. And overall, pretty solid floor. Bowers, again, no Devontae Adams. It didn't work last week. But Denver, they are extremely good against receivers. Jacoby Myers over here. They are first against slot receivers, and they are first against receivers overall. They don't have Devontae Adams. Bowers should at least have the volume or attention. We thought that would happen last week. It didn't. I would still bank on it happening in terms of you're not going to start another guy over him because it's tight ends. There's no one good, and Bowers has one of the highest ceilings in the NFL, especially this week. Kelsey is one of those guys where he's probably the tight end 1 this week now that Rashee Rice is out. So that is the big thing. Lattimore is going to be on Worthy. So that is also just like they have one kind of big play receiver on the outside, and it's going to be a really good corner on him. And then the Saints, not amazing against tight ends, but also not good. And he's projected for a decent amount of targets. He had a really good game last week after Rashee Rice got injured early on. So set up decently well. The Bengals, Chase and T. Higgins kind of right here. The volume overall, middle of the way matchup. Burrow has done well against Baltimore in the past. Baltimore does not play a lot of cover 2. And that's kind of what Bengals have struggled against in terms of getting Chase the ball, especially Chase. T. Higgins, they get the ball a little bit more. Back shoulder fades help in terms of cover 2. But Chase doesn't get as many targets when they're playing really soft coverage. And Baltimore is a lot more one high safety, a lot less cover 2. So in general, not a terrible matchup for them. Nothing to be scared of at least. Lamb avoids the Joey Porter Jr. shadow, like I said. So that is big for him. Obviously, the volume is going to be there. Steelers, they've been really good, but not overly concerned. He's going to be all over the field. He'll be fine. And then lastly, looking over here for the receivers, lastly at least, Deontay Johnson, my boy, also going against one of my other favorite players, Jalen Johnson. At corner, most of the time, Johnson's going to be on Johnson. And that's not really the best matchup. Like they're 3rd this year against receivers, and that makes a lot of sense. It's not going to be a shadow, But this week, I think it's going to be a lower passing volume, lower efficiency for Andy Dalton against this defense. I would expect a little more rushing, more of a flex play this week, not a guarantee play, even though he has been amazing these last couple weeks. Just a really tough matchup overall. And then these two tight ends, they're basically the exact opposite. They're close to each other in the graph, but basically the exact opposite. That is Trey McBride and Kyle Pitts. Neither have the greatest matchups. San Francisco is really good against the interior passing defense, linebackers and safeties. So not the greatest matchup for McBride, but again, he's a tight end that doesn't suck. You kind of have to play him. Overall, he is first among tight ends in target share, and he is first in separation score. Then we get to Kyle Pitts. He is last in separation score, which breaks my heart. And then target share, not much better. Overall, he's a tough start. Trey McBride, tough matchup, but you kind of have to start. I have another video coming out this week. It's going to be breaking down coverages, quarterback stuff. I love it. Not really fantasy related, but I would encourage you to watch it. I am putting in a lot of effort into it, so that's my plug. See you guys soon.